The Uxkhali Military Institute didn't believe in easing anyone into the experience. No gentle introductions, no welcome packets, no friendly orientation tours with enthusiastic guides pointing out the cafeteria and the nearest emergency exits. You showed up, you found your training hall, and you immediately discovered whether you had what it took to survive in a galaxy that didn't particularly care about your feelings. Kat had found the training hall just fine. Getting lost would have been embarrassing, considering she'd memorized the station layout 3 weeks before arriving. Old habits. What she hadn't quite prepared for was the sheer scale of everything. The training hall stretched out like an aircraft hangar had gotten into a fight with a cathedral, and somehow both had won. Ceilings vaulted so high overhead that she couldn't quite make out the details in the dim light. Equipment lined the walls, some of it recognizable, most of it decidedly not. One contraption appeared to be a combination ladder and bear trap. Another looked suspiciously like it was designed to test how well you could function while being actively electrocuted. Peacekeeping operations, they called it. Kat had other words for it, most of which weren't appropriate for official reports. Around 30 students filled the space, clustered in small groups that seemed to organize along species lines. Natural, she supposed. Stick with what you know when everything else is alien. Literally alien, in this case. She counted at least 12 different species in the room, maybe more if some of those variations were actually separate classifications rather than regional differences. The Quiton were easy to spot, 8 feet tall, built like someone had decided to make a bodybuilder out of granite and rage. Their skin shifted through patterns of gray and deep blue, some kind of mood indicator she hadn't quite figured out yet. 3 of them stood together near the far wall, comparing notes on data pads that looked comically small in their massive hands. Closer to her position, a group of luxpoi chattered among themselves in their musical language. They were shorter than humans, covered in fine scales that caught the light like oil on water, with 4 arms that never seemed to stop moving. Expressive people. One of them glanced her way, and Kat caught the flicker of curiosity before they looked away again. Not hostile, just evaluating. Then there were species she couldn't identify at all. Something with too many joints in its limbs. Another that appeared to be partially incorporeal, flickering at the edges like a bad hologram. A massive creature that might have been wearing armor or might have just looked like that naturally. Hard to say. And then there was Kat, 5'6", human, wearing the same standard-issue training uniform as everyone else, but somehow looking like a child playing dress-up in comparison. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun. Her posture was relaxed, but attentive. To anyone watching, she probably looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like. A liaison officer, mid-rank, here to learn how the big kids played so humanity could integrate more smoothly into galactic military operations. Perfectly unremarkable. Exactly as planned. She'd been standing there for maybe 5 minutes when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Not literally. The environmental controls were precise to a fraction of a degree, accommodating the various biological needs of the assembled species. But something shifted in the atmosphere, a collective tension that rippled through the groups of students. Conversations died mid-sentence. Postures straightened. Even the incorporeal flickering thing seemed to solidify slightly. Instructor Polmek had arrived. He entered through the main doors with the kind of presence that didn't need announcement. Quiton, like the 3 students against the far wall, but where they were merely large and intimidating, Polmek was a walking catastrophe, waiting for an excuse. Scars crossed his visible skin in patterns that spoke of decades of violence survived through skill and sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. His skin patterns were locked in deep charcoal with occasional flashes of crimson. Emotions under tight control, but not friendly ones. He carried himself like someone who'd forgotten more about combat than most beings would ever learn, which, according to the research Kat had done, wasn't far from the truth. Polmek had been teaching at the Institute for 20 years, but before that, he'd spent 40 years in active combat operations across a dozen different conflicts. His service record was the kind of thing that got partially redacted even in official military databases. "Sit," Polmek said. His voice was gravel and distant thunder. Everyone sat. Not in neat rows, there weren't any chairs, just floor space, and the implicit understanding that you found a spot and you claimed it. Kat ended up in the middle section, cross-legged on the mat surface. Key In, one of the Luxpoi she'd noticed earlier, settled a few feet to her left, their forearms folding in a complex pattern that probably meant something in their body language. Polmek stood at the front, silent, letting them all marinate in discomfort. His eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle pattern on his face, scanned the assembled students with the kind of attention usually reserved for threat assessment. Which, Kat supposed, it probably was. "You are here," he said finally, "because someone in your command structure believes you have potential. They are wrong about at least half of you. By the end of this course, we will discover which half." Not exactly an inspirational speech. Then again, Kat doubted Polmek had been hired for his motivational speaking skills. Combat certification at this level is not about learning new techniques, Polmek continued, beginning to pace along the front of the room. It is about breaking the techniques you think you know, and rebuilding them into something that might keep you alive when everything goes wrong. And in combat, everything always goes wrong. A few students nodded. The ones who'd seen action, Kat guessed. The ones who'd learned that plans were beautiful right up until someone started shooting. You come from different worlds, different species, different combat traditions. Polmek's pacing brought him closer to the seated students. Some of you believe this diversity is a strength. You are partially correct. Diversity becomes strength only after you understand how to function despite your differences, not because of them. Until then, you are just a collection of individuals waiting to die separately. Harsh, but not inaccurate. Kat had seen mixed species units fall apart under pressure because nobody knew how to coordinate across different communication styles and combat philosophies. Polmek stopped walking, his eyes fixed on something in the back section, one of the massive armored creatures. Kolmox, you believe your natural armor makes you superior in close combat. Kolmox, apparently that was the creature's name, shifted slightly. My species has stronger natural defenses than most, yes. Stand up. Kolmox stood, towering even over Polmek's considerable height. Demonstrate a defensive stance. The armored student complied, settling into a position that turned the thickest parts of their plating toward potential threats. Polmek moved, not quickly by speedster standards, but with the kind of economy of motion that came from absolute confidence. He stepped inside Kolmox's guard, found a gap in the armor plating, and placed one finger against the exposed section. Dead. Your armor means nothing if your opponent knows where to look. Sit down. Kolmox sat. Quickly. Polmek resumed his evaluation sweep of the room. You, he pointed at one of the Khitan students, you believe your strength gives you an advantage. Our species is stronger than most, Instructor. Strength is useful. Strength without speed or strategy is just mass waiting to be outmaneuvered. Next. His attention shifted to a cluster of beings that resembled bipedal insects, all chitin and compound eyes. You rely on numerical tactics, overwhelming through coordination. Our hive-mind connection allows superior battlefield communication. One of them responded, mandibles clicking, which becomes your greatest weakness when your connection is disrupted. Next, on and on it went. Polmek systematically identified each species' perceived advantage, and then casually explained why it would get them killed. It was a master class in psychological warfare disguised as instruction. Break down their confidence first, then rebuild it into something more durable. Kat had seen this teaching method before, though usually in much less multicultural settings. It was effective, if brutal. Then Polmek's eyes found her. "Human," he said, and there was something in his tone that made it sound like a diagnosis of a particularly unfortunate disease. Liaison Officer Morgan. "Instructor," Kat responded, keeping her voice neutral. Polmek moved closer, stopping about 6 feet away. "Your species is new to the Galactic Union. 12 years since first contact, 8 years since formal admission. In galactic terms, you are infants stumbling into a room full of adults." Around the room, she caught a few smirks from other students. The new kids getting put in their place. Entertainment value. "Humans are physically weaker than most combat-capable species," Polmek continued. "Your reaction times are slower. Your natural defenses are non-existent. No armor, no redundant organs, no regeneration. You have no particular sensory advantages. You lack the strength of the Quitan, the coordination of the Hive Collective, the resilience of the Kulmox." He paused, as if considering whether to continue or just let the point stand on its own weight. "Tell me, Liaison Officer, what exactly does humanity bring to galactic military operations besides a willingness to show up?" It was a trap, of course. Answer with bravado, and he'd demolish whatever claim she made. Answer with false modesty, and he'd use that to reinforce the perception of human weakness. Answer with nothing, and she'd look like she couldn't defend her own species. Kat had been in tighter spots. "We bring perspective, Instructor," she said simply. "Sometimes the newest person in the room sees things everyone else missed, because they've been looking at the same problems the same way for too long." Polmek's skin patterns shifted slightly. Surprise, maybe, or grudging acknowledgement. "Philosophy. Useful for writing poetry. Less useful when someone is trying to kill you." "Respectfully, Instructor, philosophy is just strategy you haven't tested yet." One of the Luxpoi made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly stifled. "Key in, probably." Polmek's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested Kat had just moved from generic example to specific target in his assessment. Not necessarily an improvement. "We shall see," he said finally, then turned away to address the full group again. "Your first evaluation begins now. Combat," Polmek announced, "is 10% technique and 90% refusing to panic when technique fails. We will now determine which of you understand this." He gestured toward the walls, where equipment Kat had noticed earlier began to activate. Panels slid open, revealing training weapons of various configurations. Some looked familiar: bladed implements, projectile weapons, energy-based systems. Others defied easy classification. "You will pair off. Species-matched pairs are prohibited. Find someone as different from yourself as possible. You have 30 seconds. Chaos erupted in slow motion. Students scrambled to find partners, the room filling with clicking, humming, and verbal exchanges in multiple languages. Kat stayed seated, watching the patterns form. Most students gravitated toward partners roughly their own size, probably subconsciously seeking some kind of parity. Key-In dropped down beside her, all four arms gesturing in what might have been either greeting or apology. "You do not appear to be moving. Are you injured, or is this a human meditation practice?" "Just observing," Kat said. "You need a partner?" "I do now, apparently." Koi-in's scales rippled through colors. Amusement, maybe. Their species was hard to read. "I am Ki-in. You are the human everyone is very carefully not staring at." "Cat. And yeah, I get that a lot lately." New species. Very exciting. Very scary. Nobody knows if you will explode or cry or challenge someone to ritual combat over a misplaced beverage." Ki-in tilted their head, which seemed to rotate further than human anatomy would allow. "For the record, do humans do any of those things?" "Depends on the beverage," Kat said. Ki-in made that laughing sound again, more clearly this time. "I like you. Please do not accidentally kill me in training." "Can't make promises, but I'll try." "Time!" Polmek called out. "Weapon selection is free choice. Non-lethal settings only, obviously, though some of you will wish otherwise before this is finished. The objective is simple. Disable your opponent or force surrender. There are no other rules." Kat stood, Ki-in rising beside her. They moved toward the weapon racks together. Ki-in immediately reached for something that looked like a staff with additional grips positioned for multiple hands. Smart, playing to their anatomical advantages. Kat scanned the options, her hand hovering over various implements. Energy weapons, blades, impact weapons, things she couldn't quite categorize. She selected something simple. A training baton, standard weight, nothing fancy. Ki-in noticed. "That is a very basic choice. Are you certain? There are much more impressive options available." "Basic works," Kat said. Around them, other pairs were making selections, some students picking elaborate weapon systems that probably required instruction manuals. One of the Khitan students had chosen something that appeared to be a combination hammer and energy lance. Compensating for something, maybe. "Pairs will rotate through the training circles," Polmek instructed. "Those not currently engaged will observe and learn. First pair, Kulmox and Instructor Velkin." The matches began. Kulmox, the armored student from earlier, faced off against a smaller, faster opponent. It went exactly as Polmek had probably predicted. Velkin danced around Kulmox's powerful but slow attacks, finding gaps in the armor until finally landing a decisive strike that the monitoring system registered as incapacitating. Next pair. Two more students entered the circle. This match was closer. Both fighters evenly matched in size and speed. It devolved into a grinding battle of attrition that Polmek finally called after 3 minutes, when neither fighter could gain advantage. "You fight like you are trying not to lose," Polmek said. "This is different from fighting to win." Next, 3 more matches. One ended in seconds when a Hive Collective member used coordinated feint patterns to completely confuse their opponent. Another lasted longer, showcasing some genuinely impressive technical skill. The third ended when one fighter accidentally triggered their weapon's maximum setting and nearly concussed themselves with the feedback. "Liaison Officer Morgan and Ki-in," Polmek called. "You're up." They entered the training circle, marked by subtle lighting changes in the floor. About 20 feet in diameter, enough space to maneuver, but not enough to simply avoid engagement indefinitely. Ki-in took a position across from her, staff held in 3 of their 4 hands, the fourth arm free for balance or additional attack options. Their scales had shifted to colors Kat couldn't interpret, probably focus, concentration, something in that range. "Begin," Polmek said. Ki-in moved first, coming in with a probing strike, fast, but not fully committed. Testing her reactions. Kat sidestepped, keeping her baton low and non-threatening. Ki-In followed up with a combination attack, their multiple arms allowing for strike patterns that would have been impossible for a two-armed opponent. Kat blocked, redirected, gave ground. Let Ki-In establish the rhythm of the fight. Around the circle she could sense the other students watching, probably expecting the human to get overwhelmed quickly. Physically outmatched, slower reactions. All the disadvantages Polmek had so helpfully listed earlier. Ki-In pressed the advantage, their attacks getting more aggressive. The staff spun in complex patterns, creating a defensive barrier while simultaneously threatening from multiple angles. Impressive technique, honestly. They'd clearly trained extensively. Kat continued her retreat, blocking when necessary, dodging when possible, reading the patterns. Then Ki-In overcommitted, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second. And Kat moved. She didn't go for the staff, didn't try to match Ki-In's superior reach or their multi-limb advantage. Instead, she went low and inside, past the weapon's effective range, and tapped her baton against Ki-In's forward leg joint while simultaneously using her free hand to push their center mass backward. Ki-In went down in a tumble of limbs and confusion, their staff clattering away. Kat had her baton positioned at their throat before they finished falling. "Yield!" Ki-In said, sounding more surprised than upset. Kat stepped back, offering a hand to help them up. Ki-In took it, pulling themselves upright with a ripple of colors across their scales. "That was not what I expected," Ki-In admitted. "Yeah, I get that a lot, too." They exited the circle. Polmek said nothing, but his skin patterns had shifted to something Kat couldn't quite read. Not approval, exactly. More like recalculation. 3 more pairs went. Then Polmek called a halt to the exercises. "You have demonstrated varying levels of competence," he said, which was probably the closest thing to praise anyone was getting. "You have also demonstrated that most of you fight exactly as you were taught, with no adaptation to circumstance or opponent. This will get you killed." He began pacing again, his massive form moving along the edge of the training circle. Combat doctrine becomes doctrine because it works. But doctrine becomes dogma when you forget that circumstances change. Opponents adapt. Technology evolves. A technique that was dominant a generation ago becomes a liability when everyone knows how to counter it. His eyes swept the room, landing on various students as he spoke. The Kulmak's armor that protected your ancestors against energy weapons does nothing against opponents who study your anatomy and target your weak points. The Hive collective coordination that overwhelms disorganized enemies fails against opponents who disrupt your communication. The Khitan strength that dominated close combat means nothing if you never close the distance. Polmek stopped pacing, stopped moving entirely, actually, which somehow made him more intimidating rather than less. "And humans," he said, his attention turning to Kat, "who have no natural advantages, no particular strengths, nothing that makes them obviously dangerous." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. "Humans, who have been in the galactic community for barely a decade, and who somehow keep appearing in places they should not be, doing things they should not be capable of doing." Kat felt the attention of the entire room shift toward her. Great. This was exactly the kind of spotlight she'd been hoping to avoid. "You fought well, liaison officer," Polmek continued. "You fought smart. You fought like someone with actual combat experience, not someone attending basic certification." His skin patterns flickered through crimson and something darker. "Which raises an interesting question." He took 2 steps closer, then 1 more. Standing now at the edge of the training circle, looking down at where Kat stood just outside it. Where, exactly, did a liaison officer learn to fight like that? And here it was, the moment where she had to decide how much truth to offer, how much to maintain the comfortable fiction that she was just another student learning the basics. Kat raised her hand, not frantically, not with any particular urgency, just a calm, steady raise, arm extended, palm flat, fingers together and pointed slightly upward. A gesture that probably looked meaningless to most of the students watching. But Polmek went rigid. Then he took 2 steps backward, his skin patterns flashing through colors too quickly to track, before settling on something that looked distinctly like alarm. The room went absolutely silent. Ki-in broke the silence first, their voice pitched low with confusion. What just happened? Why did the instructor who has faced down entire battalions just retreat from a raised hand? Polmek's eyes, all 3 of them, were locked on Kat's still raised hand. His posture had shifted from instructor in control to something else entirely. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition mixed with something that might have been respect or might have been profound wariness. "Where?" Polmek said slowly, his voice lacking any of its earlier commanding thunder. "Did you learn that gesture?" Kat lowered her hand, letting it fall naturally to her side. "Standard protocol from my previous assignment, instructor." Previous assignment. Polmek repeated the words like he was testing them for hidden explosives. Liaison officers do not have previous assignments that involve operational hand signals. Around the room, students exchanged glances. Even the ones who'd been smirking earlier at the human getting singled out now looked confused. Whatever was happening, it had gone off script from the usual intimidation routine. Most liaison officers don't. No, Kat agreed. Polmek's skin patterns cycled through something complicated. "I need to see your full service record. Now." "It's in the system, instructor. You have access." The official record, not the sanitized version they provide for academic review. His voice had taken on an edge. "What unit were you assigned to before this posting?" Kat hesitated, running calculations. She'd known this moment might come eventually. You couldn't completely hide certain kinds of experience, not from someone who knew what to look for. But she'd hoped to make it at least a few weeks before having this conversation in front of 30 witnesses. "I was on frontier rotation," she said carefully. "Mixed operations, various postings." Frontier rotation. Polmek made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something darker. "Is that what they're calling it now?" He turned slightly, addressing the room while keeping his attention partially on Kat. "Does anyone here know what frontier rotation actually means in human military terminology?" Silence. A few students shook their heads. "It means," Polmek said, "that she was assigned to units operating in contested space, conducting operations that do not officially exist, with forces that have no formal designation." His skin patterns flashed crimson again. "It means she served with the quiet ones." The name landed like a physical force. Several students reacted visibly. The 3 Khitan pressed closer together, the Hive collective members' clicking intensified, and Kulmox actually took a step backward, despite not being directly involved in the conversation. Ki-in looked between Polmek and Kat, thoroughly lost. "I apologize for my ignorance, but what are the quiet ones? Is this a religious order? A philosophical movement? A particularly shy social club?" "Special operations," one of the Khitan students said, her voice quiet. "Human special operations. They have been operating in contested regions for longer than humanity has been officially part of the Union." "Much longer," Polmek confirmed. While your governments were still negotiating first contact protocols and trade agreements, human military units were already deployed, already operating, already making a name for themselves among those of us who actually work in the field. He focused back on Kat. That hand signal. I have only seen it used once before, on a station in the outer fragments, during what was officially logged as a peacekeeping intervention, but was actually a rapidly deteriorating hostage situation. Kat kept her expression neutral, but internally she was running through possibilities. The outer fragments had seen a lot of human activity. Narrowing down which specific operation Polmek had witnessed would take more information. "You were there?" she asked. "I was commanding the Khitan unit assigned to perimeter security. We had orders to contain the situation, prevent it from spreading to civilian areas, and wait for a properly equipped extraction team to arrive." Polmek's tone had shifted again, becoming less instructor and more storyteller, almost. Someone recounting a memory that still didn't quite make sense. "We were told extraction would take 6 hours minimum. The hostiles had fortified positions, superior numbers, and enough firepower to turn the entire station into debris if pressured incorrectly." "But someone extracted the hostages anyway," Ki-In guessed. "3 humans," Polmek said. 3 operators who appeared without announcement, without backup, without any of the equipment or support we'd been told was necessary for the operation. They spent approximately 40 minutes inside the hostile zone. Then they walked out with all 19 hostages, 0 casualties, and the hostile leadership unconscious and secured for arrest. Kolomak spoke up, their voice rumbling. "How is that possible? 3 operators against a fortified position?" "That," Polmek said, "is the question I have been asking myself for 5 years. I watched them work. I saw their leader, a human female, approximately liaison officer Morgan's size, assess the situation for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she raised her hand, just like that." He gestured toward Kat. Her teammates saw the signal and immediately moved into position. No verbal communication, no detailed planning, just that gesture, and an apparent mutual understanding of something completely insane they were about to attempt. "What did they do?" Kian asked, fully invested in the story now. "They turned off the station's gravity," Polmek said flatly. "Just deactivated it, station-wide, with no warning. Then they breached through the environmental systems, the ventilation shafts, waste processing, maintenance corridors, every route the hostiles had, dismissed as unusable because they were too small or too dangerous or too ridiculous to consider." Kat couldn't help the slight smile. "Yeah, that sounded like something her old unit would do." Polmek caught the expression. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you?" "The hand signal," Kat said, "means I have a plan. It's terrible. We're doing it anyway. Be ready to improvise." More or less. The exact phrasing varies by unit. "A warning that you're about to do something reckless," Polmek said. "Calculated risk," Kat corrected. "There's a difference." "The difference being?" "Reckless means you haven't thought it through. Calculated risk means you have thought it through and decided the crazy option is actually your best bet." Ki-In's scales rippled with colors that definitely indicated amusement. "I feel like there is a very entertaining story we are not hearing. How does one end up in special operations before becoming a liaison officer? Is that a normal career path for humans?" "Not normal, no," Kat admitted, "but not unheard of. I did 6 months on frontier rotation, decided I preferred slightly less excitement in my daily routine, and requested transfer to liaison duties. Turns out I'm decent at the whole cultural exchange thing when people aren't actively shooting at me." 6 months, Polmek repeated. You survived 6 months with a human special operations unit. Some of us survived a lot longer than that, Instructor. Yes, but most of them are still out there, still operating, still doing things that make commanders like me wake up in the middle of the sleep cycle wondering what impossible situation they've resolved without bothering to tell anyone. Polmek's skin patterns had settled into something that looked almost like grudging respect. What operations were you involved in? Most of them are still classified, Kat said. Even for you, Instructor. Sorry. Of course they are. Polmek turned to address the full room again, his instructor persona reasserting itself. This is an important lesson for all of you. Combat experience matters more than physical advantages. Liaison Officer Morgan is, by every objective measure, at a disadvantage against nearly everyone in this room. Weaker, slower, less durable. But she has something most of you lack: practical experience in situations where doctrine failed and improvisation became necessary. He gestured toward Kat. The quiet ones earned their reputation not through superior technology or physical dominance, but through adaptability and willingness to attempt solutions that other species dismissed as impossible or insane. They weaponized creativity. They turned limitations into advantages. They succeeded in operations where other forces failed because they refused to accept that conventional approaches were the only options. One of the Hive Collective members raised a limb. Instructor, if human special operations are so effective, why do they remain unofficial? Why not integrate them fully into galactic military structure? Because, Polmek said, the galactic military structure operates on consensus and coordination between species. Human special operations work best when they're given an objective and then left alone to accomplish it, however they see fit. Putting them under formal command would require them to follow doctrine, request permission, coordinate with other units. All things that would eliminate the advantages that make them effective in the first place. So they stay in the shadows, Keehan said, operating without acknowledgement. They prefer it that way, Kat said. Less bureaucracy, fewer meetings, more time actually getting things done. But you left, Polmek observed. Why? Kat considered how much to share. The real answer was complicated. Burnout. A near miss that had gotten too close. The realization that she couldn't maintain that operational tempo indefinitely without something breaking. But those were personal details that didn't need airing in front of an audience. I wanted to see if I could contribute in other ways, she said instead. Special operations is important work, but it's not the only important work. Someone has to help bridge the gap between human military culture and galactic military culture. Someone has to explain why we do things the way we do, help other species understand that our approach isn't wrong, just different. Noble goal, Polmek said. Challenging implementation. Yeah, well, I've done challenging before. One of the Quiton students, the female who'd identified the quiet ones earlier, spoke up. Liaison Officer, may I ask about the operation Instructor Polmek described? The station in the outer fragments. Were you part of that team? Every eye in the room focused on Kat. She'd been dreading this question. I can neither confirm nor deny involvement in specific classified operations, she said, using the standard evasion. But hypothetically, if someone were involved in an operation matching that description, they might remember it as one of those missions where the situation looked impossible right up until it wasn't. Polmek made that sound again. Definitely a laugh this time, dark and knowing. She was there. That answer is as good as confirmation. Hypothetically, Kat repeated. Hypothetically, Polmek agreed, his skin patterns showing what might have been amusement. "Tell me, liaison officer, hypothetically, what did the team leader assess during those 30 seconds before giving the signal?" Kat relaxed slightly. If they were speaking in hypotheticals, she could discuss tactics without technically confirming operational details. "Hypothetically," she said, "the team leader would have been calculating force distribution, identifying weaknesses in the hostile position, and recognizing that conventional assault would result in hostage casualties. They would have noted that the hostiles had positioned themselves assuming standard approach. Vectors, doors, main corridors, predictable breach points." "And the gravity shutdown?" Ki-in asked, fully engaged now. Hypothetical hostile forces had trained for conventional combat in standard gravity. They hadn't trained for zero-gravity chaos while trying to guard prisoners and watch multiple entry points simultaneously. Remove their fundamental assumptions about the environment, and suddenly their superior numbers and fortified positions become liabilities instead of advantages. "Because they can't effectively fight in conditions they haven't prepared for," Kulmak said, understanding dawning, while the human team had specifically trained for exactly that scenario. "Humans," Kat said, "spent most of our military history fighting opponents with better equipment, better positions, or better numbers. We got good at finding ways to make those advantages irrelevant." Polmek nodded slowly. "This is the lesson. Advantage is contextual. Change the context. Change who has the advantage." "So," Ki-in said, their scales shifting through thoughtful colors, "the human approach to combat is essentially, if we cannot win the game as designed, we change the rules of the game entirely." "Is that accurate?" "More or less," Kat said, "though we prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving under pressure." "You prefer to think of it as organized chaos," Polmek corrected, but there was no heat in his voice. "Controlled insanity with just enough structure to technically qualify as tactics." He turned to face the assembled students fully. "Which brings us to the actual lesson of today's session. You have all been trained in your respective species' combat doctrines. You know the techniques, the strategies, the approved methodologies. What you lack is the ability to recognize when those doctrines will fail you." He gestured toward the training equipment along the walls. "Liaison Officer Morgan, would you be willing to demonstrate what humans actually teach in combat training?" Kat hesitated. This was moving into territory she'd been specifically instructed to avoid. Human command wanted cultural exchange, not detailed tactical demonstrations that might reveal operational capabilities. On the other hand, refusing now would raise more questions than cooperating. "What kind of demonstration did you have in mind, Instructor?" "Simple scenario. You and 4 volunteers—" Polmek's eyes swept the room. "Ki-in, Kulmox, and you two." He pointed at 2 of the Hive Collective members. "You will have 2 minutes to plan a hostage extraction from a fortified position. Standard doctrine approach versus human approach. Let us see the difference in practice." "Instructor," Kat said carefully, "human operational tactics are not classified when used in training scenarios with friendly forces," Polmek interrupted. "I checked the regulations before suggesting this. Your command structure has approved tactical demonstrations for educational purposes, provided no specific operational details are disclosed." Of course he'd checked. Polmek hadn't survived 40 years of combat by making careless assumptions. "All right," Kat said, "but I'm going to need everyone to understand something first. Human tactics work for humans because we train for them extensively. What I'm about to demonstrate isn't something you can just replicate without proper preparation. Trying to copy our approach without understanding the reasoning behind it is a great way to get killed creatively instead of just killed conventionally. Acknowledged, Polmek said. This is theoretical demonstration only. Begin. The 4 volunteers joined Kat in the training circle. Polmek activated a holographic display, showing a station layout similar to what he described earlier. Central chamber with hostages, multiple defensive positions, limited approach vectors. Standard approach first, Polmek instructed. Kolmox, you have command. Kolmox studied the layout, their armored form shifting as they considered options. We breach here and here. They indicated 2 entry points. Simultaneously, overwhelming defensive positions through coordinated assault. Hive Collective members provide covering fire, while I advance on the central position. Key-In provides support and secures hostages once the area is cleared. Time estimate? Polmek asked. 4 minutes from breach to extraction, assuming moderate resistance. Projected casualties. Kolmox hesitated. Possibly 2 hostages if the hostiles panic. Maybe one of our team if we encounter heavier resistance than anticipated. Acceptable losses by conventional standards, Polmek said. Now, Liaison Officer Morgan. Same scenario. Human approach. Kat studied the holographic layout, her mind automatically shifting into operational mode. Old patterns reasserting themselves, muscle memory that had nothing to do with muscles. First question, she said. Do we have access to environmental controls? Station maintenance access is available but monitored, Polmek said. Perfect. Key in your smallest and most agile. You're going into the maintenance shafts here. She indicated a route that bypassed all the defensive positions. And accessing the local environmental controls, you'll trigger a cascade shutdown of non-essential systems starting from the far side of the station, creating the impression of a technical malfunction spreading toward this section. Kian's scales rippled with interest. To make the hostiles believe their position is compromised by system failure rather than intentional attack. Right. While they're distracted and potentially relocating, Kolmox, you're going to make a lot of noise at this entry point. Kat indicated the most obvious breach location. But you're not actually breaching. You're demonstrating that you could breach if you wanted to. Make them commit forces to defending that position. I am pretending to attack? Kolmox sounded confused. You're creating a threat they have to respond to. Keep them focused on the wrong direction. And the actual breach? One of the Hive Collective members asked. No breach. We don't go through their defenses at all. Kat traced a different route on the hologram. Hive Collective, you're cutting through from below, here, directly into the hostage-holding area. No fighting, no confrontation with the main hostile force. You extract the hostages through the floor while they're busy watching Kolmox and dealing with system failures. That is not a standard access point, the Hive member protested. Exactly. They won't be defending it because it's not supposed to be an access point. That's the advantage. Polmek studied the plan, his skin pattern cycling through calculations. Time estimate? 90 seconds from initial environmental cascade to hostages secured. Maybe 2 minutes if something goes wrong and we need to improvise. Projected casualties? None, if we do it right. The hostile forces never actually engage us because they're too busy responding to threats that aren't real while we accomplish the objective through a route they're not watching. The room had gone quiet again. Students were staring at the holographic display, trying to reconcile the conventional approach with what Kat had just outlined. That is not fighting, Kolmox said finally. That is deception and avoidance. That's asymmetric warfare, Kat corrected. Fighting is what you do when deception and avoidance fail. Why risk casualties in direct confrontation when you can accomplish the objective without firing a shot? Because it is dishonorable, one of the Quitan students said, though her tone suggested she was questioning her own assertion even as she made it. Honor is for people who can afford it, Kat said. When you're outgunned, outnumbered, and out-equipped, honor gets you killed. Results keep you alive and bring everyone home. Polmek deactivated the holographic display. This is the fundamental difference in philosophy. Most galactic species developed military doctrine around the idea of meeting opponents in direct engagement, using superior technology, or numbers or training to achieve victory. Humans developed military doctrine around the idea that direct engagement is a last resort, not a first option. He turned to Kat. Because, for most of your history, you were the ones who were outgunned and outnumbered. Every single time, Kat agreed. We got very good at finding alternatives to fair fights, because fair fights usually meant we lost. Ki-In was still studying the now-vanished hologram, their multiple arms gesturing in complex patterns. I think I understand now why the Quiet Ones make other military commanders nervous. It is not that humans are unpredictable. It is that humans are unpredictable in very specific, very calculated ways that make all conventional defensive planning inadequate. That's probably the most accurate assessment anyone's given, Kat said. Polmek addressed the room one final time. Your assignment for the next session: review your species' standard combat doctrine and identify 3 scenarios where it would fail completely. Then consider what you would do when doctrine fails. Dismissed. Students began filing out, many casting glances back at Kat. She caught snippets of conversation, speculation, reassessment, a few comments that suggested she'd just made the next few months significantly more complicated for herself. Ki-In remained behind, waiting until most of the others had left. Question, if I may? Sure. That hand signal. The one that made Instructor Polmek retreat. What would have happened if you had actually been giving that signal for real, instead of just raising your hand innocuously? Kat smiled, the expression carrying more edge than humor. Then everyone in this room would have wanted to be somewhere else very quickly, because it would have meant I'd identified a problem that required an immediate and probably disturbing solution. Disturbing how? Let's just say there's a reason the signal includes an implicit warning to teammates. We call it the last resort for a reason. You really don't want to see it outside of genuine emergencies. Ki-In's scales shifted through colors that definitely indicated healthy apprehension. I believe I am both terrified and impressed, possibly in equal measure. Yeah, Kat said. I get that a lot, too. As they left the training hall together, Kat couldn't help but notice Polmek watching from his position near the equipment racks, his expression thoughtful. She'd managed to navigate the situation without revealing anything genuinely classified, but she'd definitely shifted the dynamic. No more playing the inexperienced newcomer. That cover was thoroughly blown. Oh well, it had been a useful fiction while it lasted. Now she'd just have to figure out how to be a liaison officer when everyone knew she was something else entirely. Should be interesting. Probably wouldn't even require any last resort solutions. Probably.